I know I've been kind of overdoing it lately on all the ski videos, but okay, it's not it's not really an influencer blog. It's just a kind of blog to document our family outings. But anyway, I thought I'd do a video on kind of a risque subject, I guess, and that is well, let me put it this way. I've been reading that there's been a surge in interest of Americans wanting to move to Europe, driven by, oh, let's just say the political chaos in the US. We moved to France 5 years ago for a lot of reasons. And political chaos was not a primary reason, but I feel that it did play a factor. Europe provided us certain hard benefits like the cost of the and quality of the children's education, the medical care, the transportation, the basic, infrastructure. There was also a cultural draw and the opportunity for our children to learn a second language. And generally speaking, we found life here less stressful. I had the added benefit of having both UK and Polish citizenship through my father. So that made the move here a little more easy than it is for other people. You can see I'm about to head out on an errand here on my European pickup truck. Anyway, so as I was saying, were a lot of reasons we moved. And we had some advantages. But, be honest, a lot of that sort of emphasis on individual freedom in the US, which sort of translates into rugged individualism, everybody on their own, is really starting to get on my nerves, especially seeing all the homeless people in San Diego and knowing that we are the richest country in the world. And that's how and to have so many homeless people, to have it look like a third world country, was just really getting on my nerves. And also, I always felt like there but for the grace of God go I. So it definitely appealed to me to move someplace where there was a bit of more of a social safety net. And now it really seems like the billionaires are just plundering what really makes a country. Our great institutions are just being chopped to pieces and privatized, and it seems like that we are, ironically, 40 years after the the Iron Curtain came down, we're becoming like Russia, just a kind of a free-for-all for criminal oligarchs to plunder the value, the wealth of the country. The strongman president, I don't know if that got cut off, with the strongman president and with oligarchs paying fealty to him, and whether they are successful in their businesses or not in accumulating wealth seems like it's going to be dependent on how much fealty they pay to our strongman president. That's my perspective anyway. Now, when we moved to France, and ever since, the thing that is real, and still the thing that shocks me, is how much goodwill there is towards Americans. I think as Americans we hear a lot about that we're hated or something in other countries. That has not been my experience. Almost everyone I've met has perhaps excessive gratitude and admiration for the US and for Americans in general. And I think there's a lot, perhaps, of gratitude left over from World War II, American troops coming in and liberating France and Germany. Well, France, I don't know if liberating Germany is the right word. rebuilding Germany. And also I found that a lot of people really loved Obama here. I think that he was viewed as a very dignified and rational president. Now, whatever as an American you may feel about Obama, that is how he is viewed abroad. I think it also made us appear to be a country that really did elect its leaders based on merit rather than race. Although I think the right in the U.S. feels it's exactly the opposite. Also, the stability of the country, of the U.S., both economically and in democracy, has resulted in a lot of soft benefits for the Anglophone world. And there's nearly an obsession with learning English, and so English-speaking people, it's fairly easy to get jobs here in France involved and based simply on your ability to speak English. It's particularly teaching jobs. Now, with both the UK and the US pulling up their drawbridge, and even in the case of the US changing their alliances to the greatest threat to Europe, just wonder how much longer that will last, as well as the goodwill towards Americans. So I think Americans in particular, but also the English to an extent, have enjoyed a privileged status abroad and here in France. And I can foresee that eroding. But is moving to France an escape from the political division, political divisiveness, and some of the chaos that's going on in the U.S.? Well, in one way, yes, in one way, no. In the way that, I think that has made our lives less stressful, better health care, more solid school system, less catastrophic expenses, unexpected expenses popping up. And I think overall a lower cost of living. I don't think, it's definitely the case, and a lower cost of living compared to where we came from, which is one of the most expensive places in the U.S., San Diego. It's definitely created more peace of mind. But in terms of the political chaos, I mean, first of all, U.S. is so huge and so powerful that you can't really escape the politics. And of course, Europe has its own dance, so to speak, right now with the far right. In fact, I had an old guy come up to me recently and tell me that he wished President Trump was their president, the French president. That was a little surprising. Anyway, in fact, at times I'd wish that we had chosen the Southern Hemisphere, since if there's a nuclear war, the Southern Hemisphere is going to fare a lot better than the Northern Hemisphere. Anyway, so, and with the U.S. abandoning the defense of Ukraine and allying itself more closely with Russia, or aligning itself more closely with Russia, I should say, and really kind of turning on its allies in Western Europe, it certainly doesn't feel safer here from a sort of geopolitical and potential conflict standpoint. kind of ironic that I've chosen to make this video on my once a month run to the very American style part of town with all the surface parking and and a big grocery store. But there's a few items at this grocery store that I like to get that can't really get in the smaller in-town urban grocery stores. Yeah, you also can't escape the global economic impact that the U.S. has. It's so intertwined with the economies of Western Europe and so dominant in many ways that, it's hard to escape. And on top of that, when you see I'm looking at my notes, if you're like us, a lot of your finances are still going to be in the U.S., so you'd be tied to those and watch, as the strength of the dollar goes up and down, that can impact your finances a lot as well. Yeah, that's right. I'm looking at toilet paper. I like to get the toilet paper here. I like this kind that comes without a tube, so you don't waste the cardboard tube. All right, let's see. So, and then there's of course a lot of filing requirements and so forth. So one of the ironies of being in France for 5 years, I've gotten interested in French politics. And now, whenever I see anything that is reminiscent of the rightward trend of the U.S. politics in the last 40 years, I get a little bit paranoid that France is going to start making the same mistakes the U.S. did. So, and on top of that, I don't worry any less about American politics. So I end up having two countries to worry about. One of the things that I think, maybe one of the coolest things that I think about France and the EU is that most of or a big portion, I think I read a third maybe, of taxes are raised through the VAT, the value added tax, which is kind of an elaborate sales tax, and it's 20%. And though that sounds horrific to Americans, at the end of the day, it's funny that I think the products, the things that you buy, the consumer items, are marked down, discounted commensurately, so that at the end, the items are not, for the most part, more expensive. In fact, they're less expensive. So, and that's after the 20% VAT is added. Now, it's not 20% on everything. On groceries, I think it varies somewhere between 2 and 5%. And, tax wonks will, of course, point out that the value-added tax tends to be a flat tax and thus kind of tax poor people harder than it taxes rich people. I think there's some truth to that. But I think it does kind of work well in the sense that it creates less sort of opposition and fewer loopholes than the income tax does. Because let's face it, in the US, while the progressive tax system sounds all good in concept, the reality is that the super wealthy are quite good at evading it through various loopholes and so forth. So yeah, I think the VAT works really well, so people aren't so militant about opposing taxes and cutting down the size of government. And when I'm here, I really take a lot of pleasure in seeing people who are working for government, providing services that I like, really keeping the parks clean and always adding new public amenities. My advice to the French people is don't get to where the U.S. is now. And the way you do that, I believe, is really, really keeping control of your super wealthy. They are evil. It takes me back to when I was going to college, going to university, and I remember one class, the teacher asking people what they wanted to do for a career. And I was really surprised at how many people wanted to do some form of public service or some kind of career where they were helping people. And I assume they wanted to have a decent middle-class income to be able to support themselves, but their primary interest was not in getting rich, but in helping, in being in a career where they help people. Those are not the people that become billionaires. And in the US, I have seen at least a 40 or 50 year step-by-step project to essentially take over our country, starting with funding groups like the Heritage Association, the Federalist Society, putting in right-wing judges. Let's never forget that in the early 1930s, a group of wealthy industrialists, the same people who are our oligarchs now, or the same type of people, plotted to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt and conduct a military coup for which they recruited General Smedley Butler. And thanks to his patriotism and his integrity, he outed the plot and stopped it. But that's who these people are. They don't believe in democracy. They believe at best in a plutocracy. Don't let your billionaires get control of the media, because once they do, they have control of information. They have control of what people believe. Don't let them finance political campaigns or opposition, because once they do, they'll have control of your elected officials. And they are not people who care about community so much as they care about themselves. Okay, on that sour note, let's try to get a little more positive. Anyway, one of the most confusing parts of France is the huge number of different types of cheeses. And grocery stores tend to be kind of stinky over here because of all the cheeses that they have. But yeah, it can be very confusing because most of the cheeses aren't the ones that Americans are familiar with. It's not so much cheddar here. Swiss cheese isn't called Swiss cheese, and I'm not even sure what it's called. There's something that looks kind of like it that's called Emmental. There you go. See, Emmental. That's a very soft Emmental. Yeah, so it took us a long time to figure out what we liked. We liked various types of Comte cheeses, and we also liked many of the soft cheeses. Let's see what the price of this is. And ironically, even though every town, it seems like every little village produces their own cheese, but cheeses are not necessarily inexpensive in France. So even though there's so many of them, but they are tasty once you get the hang of it. And let me tell you, it takes a while to get the hang of all the different cheeses. And the wine, but you know what? The price of the wine makes up for the cost of the cheese, because the wine is awesome and inexpensive, incredibly inexpensive.
You can get a pretty decent tasting bottle of red wine for €4, $4 basically. Okay, what kind of cheese am I going to get here? I want some Comte, but I think I can get some cheaper Comte than that. Probably, being the typical American, I'm pronouncing the last part of the, which I shouldn't even pronounce, probably is just Comte cheese. And of the Comte cheese, really one of the best tasting ones is the Beaufort Comte cheese. If you ever come to France and you get to the sort of Alps region, definitely stop by the town of Beaufort and go to the main headquarters where they sell that cheese. It's pretty incredible. Damn, look at that teeth. Look at the teeth on that thing. Look like kind of an eel almost. What's it called? The Merlon? Merlon, Northeast Atlantic. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, to me, government and public sector workers is us. They're the only part of society that works to us. They're the, if you will, to use a capitalist analogy, they are the corporations in which we are all shareholders. Whereas private corporations and oligarchs are not. They work for their shareholders, and if you're not one of them, they'll eat you alive if you stand in their way. So yeah, France has better infrastructure and better public services. And for my money, that makes life better. And hopefully they hold on to it and even strengthen it. Because, you know, evil forces are at work everywhere. Yeah, but at the end of the day, life is better. At least for us, it's better over here.